Walking down the streets, buildings and infrastructures have crumbled to the ground. The only source of light is the fire from the explosions. The power has been cut. Dust engulfs the entire atmosphere, and the air smells like ashes. You can hear the screams of the civilians running for their lives as their homes have been crushed. You're hungry, but there's no food. You're thirsty, but 90% of the drinking water is unsafe. This is the world the civilians of Gaza Strip had to face due to the Arab-Israeli conflict. This ongoing dispute for the land and resources of Palestine dates back to hundreds of years for both sides. The Arabs, who have been there for thousands of years, believe that the Jews cannot just waltz into their homeland and take over. However, the Jews believe that they have the right to dictate the country because of religious reasons. Jerusalem, which is in Palestine, is believed to be the holy land of the Jews. It is a sacred place to all the Jews, and because of that, they believe they have the right to authority. The devastating start to the stalemate between the two sides all began in a war known as the Israelis as the War of Independence, but the Arabs, the catastrophe. In 1947, the UN's decision to partition Palestine into two separate nations for the Jews and the Arabs immediately arose clashes between the two groups.
As the collision between two sides further escalated, both sides committed notorious acts of belligerence.
One of the most infamous events was the attack on the Arab village of Deir Yassin on April 9, 1948. There was a brutal massacre by Irgun Zavai Leumi, and the Islamic gang forces spread widely and generated both panic and retaliation. Days later, the Arab forces attacked a Jewish convoy that was headed towards the Hadash hospital, killing 78 people. On the eve of the British forces' withdrawal, Israel declared independence. A day after their declaration, forces from Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon occupied areas in southern and eastern Palestine that was not divided to the Jews. They then proceeded to capture East Jerusalem, including the small Jewish quarter of the Old City. Their purpose was to restore law and order in light of the British withdrawal. Meanwhile, the Israelis won control over the main road to Jerusalem and successfully repulsed repeated Arab attacks. By early 1949, the Israelis managed to occupy all the Negev up to the former Egypt-Palestine frontier, except Gaza Strip. Known as one of the most gruesome events throughout the entire struggle between both sides, the Six-Day War totaled 20,000 Arab deaths and 700 Israeli deaths overall. Taking place from June 5th to June 10th in 1967, the Israelis obtained victory by capturing Sinai Peninsula, Gaza Strip, West Bank, Old City of Jerusalem, and Golan Heights. On the morning of June 5th, Israel staged a sudden preemptive air assault that destroyed more than 90% of Egypt's air forces on tarmac. Similar air assaults were initiated that incapacitated Syria's air forces. With no air force, the Egyptian army was left vulnerable to attacks. Within 3 days, the Israelis achieved an overwhelming victory on ground. They managed to capture Gaza Strip and Sinai Peninsula up to the east bank of the Suez Canal. The eastern front was open on June 5th when Jordanian forces began shelling West Jerusalem, disregarding the Israelis' warning to King Hussein to keep Jordan out. They faced Israel's counterattack. On June 7th, Israeli forces drove Jordanian forces out of East Jerusalem and most of West Bank. The United Nations Security Council's UNSC called for a ceasefire that day, which was accepted by both Israel and Jordan. Egypt accepted it the following day, but Syria didn't and continued to shell villages in northern Israel. On June 9th, Israel launched an assault on Golan Heights and captured it from Syrian forces. Syria later accepted the ceasefire on June 10th.
On October 6, 1973, the hopes of winning back territory lost to Israel during the Third Arab-Israeli War led to the Fourth Arab-Israeli War, the Yom Kippur War. Egyptian and Syrian forces launched a coordinated attack against Israel on Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar. The Arab armies had the element of surprise and made impressive advances with their modern Soviet weaponry. Iraqi forces soon joined the war, and Syria received support from Jordan. Egyptian troops swept deep into Sinai Peninsula, and Syria struggled to overthrow the occupying Israeli troops out of Golan Heights. After several days, Israel was fully mobilized. The Israel Defense Forces began counterattacking against the Arab forces and lost a heavy number of soldiers as well as equipment. A U.S. airlift of arms aided Israel's cause, but President Nixon delayed the emergency military aid for a week as a tacit signal of U.S. sympathy for Egypt. Israel ended up claiming victory as they counterattacked and recaptured Golan Heights. On October 25th, an Egyptian-Israeli ceasefire was secured by the UN. Israel's victory came at a cost of heavy casualties, and Israeli citizens criticized the government's unpreparedness. Although Egypt had yet again suffered military defeat at the hand of its Jewish neighbor, the initial Egyptian successes greatly enhanced Sadat's prestige in the Middle East and gave him a window to seek peace. In 1974, the first of two Egyptian-Israeli disengagement agreements providing for the return of portion of the Sinai to Egypt were signed. In 1978, Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menahem Begin signed the first peace agreement between Egypt and Israel. In 1982, Israel fulfilled the 1979 peace treaty by returning the last segment of Sinai Peninsula to Egypt. The unexpected Egyptian-Israeli ceasefire exposed Syria to military defeat, and Israel seized more territory in Golan Heights. In 1979, Syria voted with other Arab states to expel Egypt from the Arab League. More recent attacks include the 3 attacks Israel launched on Hamas in Gaza Strip. The assaults managed to destroy most of the city's infrastructure, as well as Gaza's only power plant. Operation Cast Leak destroyed 47,000 homes, and more than 1,440 Palestinians were killed, 920 of them being civilians. In 2012, the Israeli forces killed 167 Palestinians, 87 of them were civilians. This operation was Operation Pillar of Defense, and it killed 35 children and 14 women. 126 homes were destroyed because of this operation. The final operation was in 2014, when Israel launched an assault for 50 days, killing more than 2,100 Palestinians, 1,462 being civilians, and 50 of them were children. 11,000 Palestinians were wounded, and 20,000 homes were destroyed. This deadly operation was known as Operation Protective Edge.
Unfortunately, a superabundance of dreams is paid for by a growing potential for nightmares. Sir Peter Ustinov.